worries.
There we go.
But in that particular slide,
which slide?
The policy, capital, and technology slide, we don't think technology will ever be a bottleneck.
That's your theory of change slide.
Yeah, our sense is that technology will always be the leading indicator here. There will always be 30 to 50% of the entire carbon emissions landscape that can be cost effectively offset by today's technologies, but for market failures and policy failures. Now, if they're cost effective, then the policy failures are probably easier to overcome, right? If they're going to save people money, they're probably easier to overcome. So then, how do you get capital flowing into those spaces? And that's where we choose to focus our time. How do you get institutional money into those spaces? We focus on 25 sort of major areas of carbon emissions, around 7 categories.
This slide here.
That slide there.
Again. Get a picture of this slide for. This is the 7 areas are electricity, transport, built environment, industry, land use, emerging economies, and carbon management.
Yeah, so what we're finding is in those areas, the reason things don't happen is, one, because there's some sort of barrier to energy efficiency, etc. But 2 is because we make illogical decisions. I mean, today in the electricity sector, we can prove that advanced 21st century technologies are cheaper than new coal plants, new nuclear plants, new natural gas plants. But in fact, we do it the old way because inertia sort of pushes us that way. And in fact, it's not a Democrat-Republican issue or, independence or whatnot. I mean, even the Democrats are pushing for 20th century technologies to get implemented in ways that are illogical. It's very expensive to put in new coal or new nuclear. But in fact, we don't focus on aggressive energy efficiency, targeted smart grid, targeted storage, targeted distributed generation. There's 200 gigawatts of combined heat and power opportunities in this country that we refuse to mine, even though 8% of all the power in the U.S. comes from combined heat and power today. So it's a proven technology, everybody knows about it. But there's like a fundamental failure, for instance, in the Clean Air Act, where EPA basically, for existing locations that have permits, has the ability to basically force hundreds of millions of dollars worth of upgrades if people actually pursue these efficiency measures. And so a lot of them are afraid to do so. Yeah, maybe not so simple, but far more targeted than trying to pass a massive climate bill. And in fact, even the Congressional Research Service has said that by targeting this and by focusing on natural gas replacement of coal, you could reduce carbon emissions by 400 million tons in a very short amount of time. 400 million tons is not a small number.
So what would you do? Yeah, I mean, I've written a lot about cogeneration. Worked, know Tom and Sean Caston very well, and have heard their story. It remains one of the great challenges. Utilities don't like cogeneration and put a lot of obstacles. What do you have a couple of high leverage points that you're thinking of?
Well, I mean, part of this I think is to play judo, right? I mean, electric utility companies are incredible companies that have provided us with very reliable electricity to meet our economic growth challenges over the last 30 or 40 years. But today, I mean, they're still stuck in 20th century practices that are actually hurting our ability to grow over the next 20 to 30 years. And, one of the things that the Obama administration did very well is to put in a couple $100 million into the cogeneration fund to fund the provision in the 2007 Energy Policy Act that never got funded to help overcome these barriers, because electric utilities specifically set standby charges for CHP plants exactly at the point at which it doesn't become cost effective. It's amazing how varied the numbers are depending on what people are charging per megawatt hour in their state. So, so I think that's one place where we can focus, and it doesn't cost more money out of the federal budget. But what it means is that the Department of Energy, for instance, has to focus a few $100,000s on actually doing a study that shows how much money we're leaving on the table in this time of very high unemployment. Right? What happens is when you have high unemployment and very high deficits is that you have an inability to use public money to solve those high unemployment issues. Right? At some point, you run out of the ability to deficit spend. So then you have to replace that public money with private money.
Mm-hmm.
Well, where would you suggest we do that? In places where you have energy waste, where project finance is possible, right? If you have high leverage points there, where with just a few dollars of research, of bully pulpit usage, of figuring out how to actually lead by example in places like California that have huge budget deficits, but also still have huge amounts of CHP potential and energy efficiency potential, because the utilities there have hated CHP and energy efficiency measures for a long time, then you have the ability to help close the budget deficit in California, help close the unemployment gap there by using private investment dollars.
Yeah, well, so this is going to take you to the state level, I guess, at least in the United States. I'm wondering, I mean, you look at California, they did flip the regulations, and we see a lot of energy efficiency done.
We do.
But we don't see a lot of CHP done.
That's right.
I guess two questions. Are you going to try to replicate the efficiency model of California in other states and maybe even improve on it?
Yeah, I don't think it's possible to replicate California's efficiency model, because it deliberately basically took, it was deliberately done, I think, in a way that the utilities could never embrace, right? I mean, ultimately, utility companies don't make money off of decoupling plus bonuses like they do in California. They don't lose money under that scenario, but they don't make money under that scenario. So if you're a shareholder of a utility company that's decoupled, that's not a great investment strategy. You're just stemming the bleeding. You're not actually providing them with economic growth opportunities. So we have to choose. In a place like in energy efficiency, they have two choices. Either we have to give them investment opportunities, like saying to them, well, you normally invest $3 billion a year in CapEx at a 12% guaranteed rate of return. So now we're going to give you the opportunity to invest $5 billion a year in CapEx so that your stock price can go up, right? Or we basically have to say to the utility, look, you're going to become a shell of what you are, right? This is what we told the telecom companies in 1996, right? In 1996, we didn't tell them that. We sort of led them to believe they could be something different, and they turned out to be something different. But, telecom companies who run the backbone of this country are much smaller companies than what they were pre-1996. And they basically are focused on the reliability of the telecom industry and not focused on selling minutes. There are lots of marketing companies focused on selling minutes. And the utility company would have to become the same if we decide to go that way, where they would be in charge of interconnecting all of these various CHP plants and solar plants with storage and demand response and load control and all the things you can do. But then they would become a smaller unit than what they are today. So you have a choice, right? You either make them a capital engine by letting them spend double the amount of CapEx that they're spending now, which makes their stock price go up, but using it for the right reasons, mining, energy efficiency, CHP, etc. Or you go the other route and make them smaller and then let people compete. But, California chose to do neither. So California chose to go in the center, which is why PG&E stock is not something that anybody wants to buy.